In purely Myers-Briggs terms, people typed as ESFP and ESFJ will typically look very similar, being extroverted, sensory, and feeling in the trait sense. Their stereotypes are both jolly, gregarious, social, etc. However, my interest, as you will know from many of my other videos, is the theory that underlies these appearances and shows that although on the surface many people may seem interchangeable between these two types, underneath that surface there are important differences that not only differentiate the typical examples of these types, but explain the atypical examples as well. With that stated, I will give an introduction of the ESFP's theoretical axes before moving on to more of the ESFP personality itself. Recently, I did a video on the ESFJ personality. In that video, I introduced a characterization of the function axes, with the SENI and TEFI axes being contextual, that was the word I used, and the NESI and FETI axes transcending all contexts, i.e., universal. The ESFJ is a type that is wholly universal in this sense. They are always transcending their own context in seeking to better accommodate the contexts of all the words that I mispronounce, it's this one. The contexts of They are the contexts of others. They are thus always contaminating their Gosh dang it! They are thus always contaminating their souls with the souls of others, foregoing their own subjects' demands in order to better include the demands of others, i.e., they are democratic souls. They shift all the authority and power from their own heads to the collected heads of the whole group. This is at least how they wish to see the matter, though whether in reality they succeed is up for debate. On the other hand, there is the ESFP, a wholly contextual type, the opposite of the ESFJ. Thus, rather than continually giving oneself away, spreading oneself into a thinner and thinner sheet and otherwise dissolving oneself in the solutions of others, these are how the ESFJ loves to put it somewhat unfairly. Rather than all this, the ESFP does the opposite. They, in a sense, consolidate themselves, reserve themselves, purify themselves, all with lots of quotation marks, and always seek to act with full authenticity to themselves, wherever they happen to stand. By doing so, their love becomes a pure overflow from their very nature, which blesses those around them. In short, the ESFJ loves you by contorting into what they think you need, whereas the ESFP loves you by becoming even more purely themselves, trusting the beauty hidden inside of them to do the rest. The ESFJ sacrifices while the ESFP lavishes, and these notions ultimately apply generally to their respective axes temperaments. Of course, one will find ESFPs literally sacrificing or ESFJs literally lavishing, but the inner psychological realities behind these acts I judge to always be the other way around. We can begin to see at this point how the ESFP is directly opposite the INTP, just as the ESFJ opposes the INTJ. Exploring the contrast sheds a great deal of light on the ESFP. The INTP is seeking for principles that apply at all times and places other than their own, but the ESFP always acts according to their own time and place alone, for anything else would feel to them contrived, clumsy, and dishonest. They don't want to act through a principle, they want to act as their own living principle. From the INTP's point of view, this amounts to a stunning lack of self-consciousness, or even a rejection of self-consciousness altogether, in favor of just doing whatever they feel like at a given moment, a slave to their passions and groundless sentiments, a very happy and energetic dog. Yet there is also a grudging respect here for the ESFP's equally stunning ability to face contradiction, danger, and dilemma while hardly flinching, something which comes from privileging their heart's thoughts over their heads. They don't have to take the time to formulate a perfect principle. They are wont to just simply act, for better or worse. For the INTP, and their entire axis temperament, there is a great disparity between their will and their actions. Everything has to be justified for the INTP in terms of what is best for the whole system, never just for themselves. They have plenty of desires and fears and passions, but their emotional force is lost in the perfectionistic bureaucracy of their mind. This makes them meticulous thinkers and philosophers and world builders, but rarely good actors in the world. Their reaction time is too slow. The ESFP, much to the INTP's continual bewilderment, seems to have fired their entire bureaucracy in one stroke and instituted an absolute monarchy instead. There is no disparity between will and action here. For all appearances, what they want is what they do. This certain impulsivity gives them a peculiar innocence and childlikeness that is alternatively awe-inspiring and frustrating depending on the situation. Probably the most concise and revealing image I can use to compare the contextual temperament and the non-contextual universal temperament is monarchy versus democracy. The ESFP is psychologically monarchical, while the INTP is psychologically democratic. It mirrors the situation between the democratic people person of the ESFJ and the monarchical isolationist of the INTJ. Except now the conflict is between a monarchical people person and a democratic isolationist, a lavish emperor versus a mild-mannered contributor to science. And that really is the soul of the ESFP, something of an emperor who loves to lavish people with gifts and show off his amazingness and perfect good humor, and praise the amazingness of his guests all around him, just have an amazing time. One can easily imagine, of course, how things might quickly get out of hand, as the ESFP drives themselves into a joyful frenzy with all their friends until something gets wrecked by accident. For the ESFP's part, if and when they become disgruntled or put off or bewildered by the INTP, it will be because of their mental lag time, the INTP's mental lag time, and the coldness or dryness that naturally comes from putting off one's immediate will in favor of something abstract. This feels like an unnecessary crutch that keeps getting in the way of just doing things how they want in a given instance. The ESFP doesn't understand this mode. The ESFP is very nearly a Nietzschean overman or Dionysus figure, continually funneling the will to power through their open actions in the world, or at least aspiring with all their might to be that way. This requires that all their internal piping be directly aligned, so that pressing a key on their organ produces the loudest and richest sound immediately. And therefore, if they don't know instinctually and passionately what to do in a given scenario, then it's a sign for them that something is very wrong with their internal wiring, and they need to fix it so they can sing loud and clear and immediately again. When they find a satisfactory solution, they will trumpet it so wholeheartedly that the INTP can only stand there and wonder how the ESFP hasn't gotten themselves killed by hugging a bear, or something. I'm speaking from not my experience. I always really enjoy the ESFP's spontaneity as I've experienced it, but the INTPs who I've known have just uncomprehendingly stared. Anyway, sorry. So the INTP must continually underestimate the sophistication of the human heart and its remarkable ability in the ESFP to handle situations in the most fruitful ways. But for the ESFP, this advantage comes at a cost. They cannot truly account for themselves in terms of a greater good. The human heart cannot conceptualize itself or translate itself to a general assembly. It simply is the way that it is, which is to say, it acts within a particular context, not according to a trans-contextual code that others can understand. Understanding can only come through sympathetic parallelism, Jung's phrase when referring to introverted feeling, which is the auxiliary function of the ESFP. So that is, sympathetic parallelism is a more or less lucky correspondence between two people's internal experiences. That moment when someone else's human experiences perfectly correspond to your own, and you know that they really know what you're talking about. But that is more of a mysticism than a science. In fact, this idea often leads to a major mistake in portrayals of the ESFP, namely the idea that they are inherently unintellectual. In fact, from my experience, I don't think I've met an ESFP who did not take a very genuine interest in philosophy and intellectual matters, whether on their own or whenever I would bring them up. It is just that they approach such things in a way that many intellectuals consider, to put it lightly, incorrect, or more often they feel it's shallow. The ESFP really, really loves whatever they're studying and actually wants to live it openly and thoroughly and find actual, real examples of it that they'll trumpet. They lack the restraint and, in many people's mind, they might say the subtlety unofficially expected of intellectuals. To put it rather cynically, the ESFP isn't dry or abstract. Philosophy for them lives, which is another connection to Nietzsche's Dionysian ideal. And as such, they tend to leap from big idea to big idea, from mountaintop to mountaintop, in order to keep their excitement up, because it is only when they are energized that anything worthwhile happens for them. They thus have the ability to bring together enormous concepts from every background, having no qualms to hold them back from making what seems to them like a perfectly reasonable and useful, even delightful connection, regardless of how reckless or indulgent it may appear to the professors. Much of what has so far been said can be summarized by referring to the socionics concept of the superego block. This is the pair of functions which a given type is most opposed to. Thus, in the ESFP's case, this would be TI and NE, the dominant functions of the INTP. Thus, where the INTP restrains themselves and consults a universal law that's applicable to all cases, TINE, the ESFP proceeds immediately, consulting their heart as it speaks to them in the present case, SEFI. The ESFP struggles to think in terms of universal rules apart from their senses and sentiments in the moment. At this point, it is worth noting that according to IDR Labs, previously known as Celebrity Types, the most best-selling self-help authors and advocates are all ESFPs. I'm specifically thinking of Tony Robbins, Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, and Paulo Coelho. Screw it. The modern notion of self-help is, I believe, a very ESFP sort of thing, whether or not every ESFP actually likes it. In some sense, it tends to characterize the ESFP's approach to philosophy and the typical fruits they produce from it. It's a strange marriage between everyday life and the mystical, where the mystical is made something approachable and common, yet without it ever losing its mystique. The ESFP boldly approaches the throne of God and asks with genuine respect if they may get an autographed photo. It is precisely this sort of quote-unquote naivete that frustrates, confuses, or delights other types. The source of this approach can be found primarily in their tertiary extroverted thinking, I think anyway. In the ESFP, extroverted thinking offers the kind of thinking necessary to actuate their desires. Even though they themselves are hardly a TE type, they will overemphasize its importance for them and be continually trying to integrate it more and more into their life, in the same way that an INFJ will often have a tendency to overemphasize TI. Yet, without ever compromising their other more preferred functions, it's always in their service. Thus, self-help books, or things of a similar nature, are the result of an excitable but ultimately juvenile TE trying to find real applications for their new exciting interests. To then see people using their books and showing real active signs of development, real measurable evidence, is extremely gratifying for them because it further affirms their maturing TE. They're able to say, look, I was able to actually codify something or come up with something that is creating measurable results in other people. It brings this feeling of power with it. In fact, their extroverted thinking gives them close relation with the ENTJ. Both types are in the same function axis temperament. Furthermore, both types have unrepressed SENTE in the function stacks. In a sense, they are the two SETE types, you could say in a sense. Both are more concerned with perceiving and affecting actual present reality. Thus, both types' philosophical endeavors are, in their own ways, marriages of very high concepts and very down-to-earth applications. They want living results, living evidence for their SENTE to register and work with. They live off effects in the present moment. The difference is that the ENTJ is never overtly sentimental, whereas the ESFP embraces sentiment. The ENTJ strives in most cases to be coldly scientific, actually I think that's in all cases, while the ESFP only ever does so reluctantly. Furthermore, the ENTJ represses introverted feeling, meaning they repress the function that provides sentimental meaning and value to their TE machinations, the part that interprets the facts according to a desire or goal or deeper meaning. By repressing that part of themselves, they are not always aware of their own emotional attachment to a thing or their real feeling motivations for something. They think that it really is all coldly scientific to them. The ESFP, on the other hand, represses an I, meaning they repress the function that provides non-sentimental meaning and vision to their SE experiences, the I for interpreting what SE implies about the future. The effect is actually rather similar to that in the ENTJ, only not in terms of what is loved, but merely what is seen. The ESFP is not always aware of their actions' deeper implications, particularly for the future. They are exceptionally well equipped for the present moment, but the future continually escapes them in a way, even if it does not seem like it when you're talking with them. The ESFP experiences the sentimental value of their actions much more maturely than the future implications of those actions. In other words, the ESFP can deeply love that they did a certain thing, can feel that that thing was profoundly important, and express that profundity in a way that excites and persuades other people, all without seeming to register what it actually means. SE and NI work in tandem to provide razor-sharp perceptions within a person's context. From the given data set, it works out the implications. In the moment, one sees the way forward almost instinctually. The INTJ is more focused on the vision of the data, but the ESFP is more focused on the data that inspired that vision. So they want to live the vision, not just see it. But this means that the vision becomes something unconscious, something that secretly guides them, but they are only dimly aware of it. Their efforts to become more aware of it often lead them into philosophy and the mystical. Many things that the ESFP does are explicable as instant, spontaneous, possibly reckless, but utterly sincere actualizations of their secret NI. They can sense that there is something important and powerful and potent underneath the surface of existence, but they often struggle to get at it. The best way they know how is to concretize it, to live it, to make something happen. Hence, they bring philosophy down to earth in an oddly sacred/vulgar way that can really entrance and attract people. I'm done!